So we're following the tradition.
Existing pattern.
I don't, yes, yeah, the laptop is up there, so that's where you do your, yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hello. Hello.
We look for, Zoom. Maybe I'll pull it this way a little bit. Can you do that? Or am I gonna ruin everything?
While you're setting up, maybe we could take a quick minute to introduce ourselves.
Sure.
Vincent Queets.
Kevin here, GSP Group.
Julia Van Vliet, urban designer with the City of Hamilton.
David Howe, Diamond Schmidt Architects.
Yes. And maybe we could start this end of the table and work our way around the community.
Mario from Adesso Design. Landscape Architect.
David Prudnick from David Prudnick Architects.
James Webb, planning consultant.
Sandy McIntosh from Perkins and Will.
Robert Friedman, Urban Solutions.
Yes, and this one from Farrell Partnership.
So I guess I'm going to start giving just a quick brief overview of the Barton Tiffany Urban Design Study in case some of you are not familiar with the area and the reason for the study. And then the consultants are going to walk you through the portions that we've asked you to review, which is Chapter 4, the concept plan, and then the urban design guidelines that relate to those lands north of Barton, which is Barton Tiffany proper. The whole project also contains Central Park and some infill residential, but we think we've got that part under control. The big picture, the big ticket item is those lands north of Barton.
Could I just,
Yeah.
before we start, I just wanted, in the interest of full disclosure, I have a client, I've been retained by the White Star
Oh, right,
Group
right,
to
right.
do some work for them on the Barton Tiffany lands, which I don't really think is, in my opinion, a conflict of interest because all of their height and zoning is already enshrined into law
Thank you.
through the OMB.
Yeah, it is.
But I just,
It is a design that White Star has put forward, and we've placed it in this study. So, yeah, that's the White Star lens. Okay, so I'm going to be really brief so that they can get on to talking about the urban design portion of it. So, the Barton Tiffany lands are located within the West Harbor Setting Sail secondary plan. And the secondary plan required that an urban design study be conducted before these lands could be developed. And the city owns a few large parcels, so before selling them, this urban design study had to be completed. So the secondary plan was finally approved in the end of 2012 by the OMB, and we started the urban design study in the spring. We hope to have this report to council, this final study and the staff report to council this fall, and then these lands can go forward. I don't know if that works. Okay. The land uses are restricted based upon the CN Rail shunting yards to the north. There's acoustic and vibration issues, and no residential can be within 150 meters of those lands. The red star up there is generally the part of the Barton Tiffany lands. So because of that, the lands along the north side of Barton are going to be residential, and the remainder, which is quite a large block, is commercial, and that's the reason for that. We're not contesting the land uses, we're just trying to come up with the best design for this arrangement. So the residential lands can go up to a height of 4 stories, and they can go 8 stories in any place if this urban design study indicates that it is suitable and appropriate. With respect to the commercial lands, they can go up to a height of 4 stories. And parking in general, they've got a downtown kind of feel in that they would like it underground or structured or behind the building. Hopefully not large expanses of surface parking.
You're referring to the commercial lands when you say that, right?
All, yeah.
lands. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that'll help explain what you see on the concept plan later. That's why you don't see a whole lot of surface parking. The study area is abutting the James Street North GO station to the north. People say, but that's not where the station is. But the actual parking structure and parking lot goes all the way to Hess. And the platform extends to, I think, about Tiffany Street. So you could actually walk onto the platform from these lands, which is a pretty big deal. As I said earlier, we also, Barton Tiffany proper really ends up Barton Street, but we've brought it down to include Central Park so that we can design the two parcels in conjunction and make them have some synergies with them. These are just some interesting pictures. Barton Tiffany was part of the Iroquois shoreline way back when, and then it turned into industrial lands mixed with residential. Apparently it was considered progress to live right beside where you worked, even though those were industrial lands. Here's just a quick image to show you the Barton Tiffany lands are the purple on this aerial photo, so you can see it's within that 10-minute walking distance of the new GO station. And that red star on the aerial photo to the bottom is a part of the GO station. The next one is just to show you that if you look above the aerial photo, that's where the waterfront is, so it's walking distance to that. And also, if you were to walk south, I'm mixing up my directions, there's a lot of great stuff going on with our downtown. Central Park is part of the study area, and it's a pretty decent park, and it's well used. This area, that part of Strathcona and Central is they use the park a lot, so we want to make sure that it is functioning and improving. So another interesting characteristic of this study is the city owns two very large parcels and some smaller lots within the study area. So it's an opportunity to do something if we have to put a road in or have to tweak the zoning or official plan to suit, we can do it. There's just some images of the rail yard, and the fact that it's a shunting yard is makes for those issues with acoustics. And the red star in the aerial photo, if you follow it to the left, there's a chunk of land that's in the study area, but it recently went back to CN Rail for the GO station so that they could create the new lines to come in to pick up the passengers. As I mentioned before, there's some issues of brownfields and need for remediation, so that's an added challenge to the lands. There's topographical issues. To the very east, Bay and Barton is higher, and then it slopes down almost like a bowl and then back up as you get to the other end. Also, from Central Park down, the whole thing slopes to the water, so there's interesting topography. That's a shot looking down Barton to the west, and that's a shot looking east on Barton. The other great thing is that we're also looking at the streetscapes and redesigning the streets for active transportation. There isn't a bus route into this area yet, but we're hoping there will be in conjunction with the GO station. So although we didn't ask you to evaluate the streetscapes, we're more interested in the built form and that urban fabric. That's a large component of the study. There's a lot of interesting architecture in the area, a lot of brick, stone, a mixture of industrial buildings and old row houses. And now I'm going to hand it over to GSP Group, and they're going to present the concept plan and lands north of Barton.
Thank you. It's Kevin Muir with GSP. GSP was the lead consultant on the Barton Tiffany Urban Design Study. We have a multidisciplinary team with Diamond and Schmidt, Paradigms looking at the traffic concerns, MTE, engineering, HTC is looking at the noise, and Barry Lyons working with us on the market testing. We've, what we're calling, we're in the home stretch now. We've been at this for the better part of a year now. The last couple days and the next week or so has sort of been our blitz in terms of consultation and engagement. We had a session with the focus group, our last one last Monday, I guess it was. Today's session, we have a public session next Monday, and then the TAC. So we got 4 sets of eyes on the draft document that's in front of you. And after that point, we're going to be taking everything we hear and sort of refining the concept and the guidelines and the report itself, and going back to council for final adoption in the fall. As Julia said, quickly to summarize sort of our 3 or 4 months of background review and the 4 points, there's 4 main issues that are really affecting the design of the area and things that we were considering throughout the process. One, obviously, is the secondary plan policies. The 2 biggest issues or the 2 biggest policies in regard to the height along Barton Street, so that was a primary consideration as part of our exercise in terms of heights and forms, and also the giant swath of commercial land at the north, which is the sort of the buffer to the rail line to the north of that. The rail presence is a big issue, obviously, both from a physical perspective in terms of disconnecting the waterfront from Barton Tiffany, but also the visual aspect, and also the noise aspect. It's a big deal, obviously. That's why we have HTC Engineering on board, who's running the acoustical model and testing some of our concepts in terms of what works and what doesn't. Topography, as Julia said, it's a big bowl. There's big drops on the east and west, and there's a gradual from south to north. So as part of our concepts and forms, we've tried to maintain some longer range views, potential to the waterfront. And the neighborhood fabric is a big one we saw and also heard. This turn of the century, worker housing, brick, stone, and low-rise profile. So we tried to fit in as much as possible with that in the concept that you see. The last time we met with the community, we tested 2 demonstration concepts. We had 9 different design variables, so we played around with different looks at those. These included, the configuration of streets, the configuration and approach for Central Park, and obviously the massing and the form and the heights and the setbacks of some of the buildings. And the input we got from that and from city staff through that process got us to what we're calling the preferred urban design concept at this point. We have a series of 6 sets of design guidelines within the final report, the draft report. Obviously 2 deal with the public realm, the streetscapes, and the design vision for Central Park. The remaining 4 deal with the Barton Street corridor, the mid-rise corridor as we call it, the Stewart Street, which is the non-residential and commercial and behind, and also the infill. There's a number of different pockets throughout the area that are created through the reconfiguration of Central Park, and then a set of general design guidelines that apply everywhere. So it's a very comprehensive document, obviously a very big document. I'm not going to try to run through all the design guidelines. I want to give you the sort of the main 5 main themes of the report that's in front of you in terms of the concept and the thought process that went into it. The first was trying to rebalance the streets within the Barton Tiffany area. We've got 2 main streets, Barton Street and Stewart Street, which are both 4 lanes with 2 travel lanes in each direction, and not necessary from a traffic perspective. So we're trying to incorporate more multi-modes with pedestrians and cyclists. There's one new street that's been added in the design concept, which is this mid-block street, as we call it. So it runs parallel to Barton, north of Barton. And what this was, this serves 2 purposes. Obviously, it's to create a separation or a seam between the commercial and the residential, and also for access off of Barton Street. To get away from access off Barton Street from the new mid-block street. In terms of the cycling pedestrian infrastructure, the main elements are a system of multi-use trails. So we have one that comes along Barton and on the north side connecting to the GO facility, and also a similar one that goes north-south on the east side, connects to the park through the corridor and up to the GO station. I'll touch very quickly on Central Park. Obviously, it wasn't as part of your review, but the design vision for Central Park largely comes from the secondary plan, which sees a re-establishment of the grid network through the park. The park currently, it goes in this location. Caroline Street is cut off at both ends. So what the concept shows is a reconnection of that, which creates a number of infill opportunities throughout the grid network. And we tested a couple different concepts for this. One of our mandates was to look at the option for retaining a facility, a Barton Public Works facility down there. It's an older building, industrial fabric. And it sounded like there was a lot of interest from the community in terms of preserving that. And what we've identified is maintaining a portion of that or a shell of that for a community use or a recreation use, something that the city will have to determine further down the road, which leaves the remainder as a combination of an open lawn in this location and an active recreation focus closer to the existing residential neighborhood. And then the resulting infill parcels in these locations would be, as per the secondary plan, will rise up to 3 stories, singles, semis, towns. And essentially all they do is complete the grid in terms of the existing form that's in the surrounding neighborhood. We also heard from the community this concept of we like to extend this notion of Central Park and the greenness and park-like setting of Central Park down the Caroline Street corridor all the way to Stewart Street. And this was partially because of the movement and the connectivity, but also because of the views that could open up to the Bayfront Park, which is at the terminus. And so what we've identified in the design guidelines is a little more generous of a setback in these locations moving north of Barton. So something in the order of 6 to 10 meters on the east side, and on the west side 4 to 6 meters. Could accommodate additional landscaping, amenity areas, spill-out space for commercial, things like that. And as you move further down Caroline Street, the opportunity for this angled plaza, which accommodates a number of different functions in terms of recreation space, commercial space, spill-out space, but also angles the view shed towards Bayfront Park, so it opens up as you go further north along the street. And the height along Barton was probably one of the biggest issues to the community sessions that got the most attention for obvious reasons. The secondary plan says as a right 4 stories can go up to 8 based on this study. And so what we've identified based on what we heard was these are the first 2 blocks. So this is Queen Street and Caroline Street here. So the first 2 blocks, based on what we heard, we'd like to get a transition in these existing neighborhoods, so keep it to 4 stories. There's 2 forms that we've shown as one that's more of a sort of a ground-oriented multiple form that fronts the street, that provides a transition from south to north. And we're showing these buildings along the back for one main reason, that's for the noise shielding purposes. So to frame the built form along the back, shielding the internal courtyards, and also the buildings on the front. So to keep the low profile as you go across, and then we've added some height emphasis at the Caroline and Barton intersection. And these are buildings that are probably in the order of 12 to 14 stories and 14 to 16 based on a podium of 2 to 4 stories. The secondary plan does have provisions in it in terms of the contamination remediation and in terms of cost effectiveness. If more height is needed, there is provisions in that policy. And so we've identified throughout Barton Street a 3-story street wall height with setbacks at the 4th story and setbacks depending on the height at the 7th and 8th, and the tower will be set back further. And then further east of Caroline is an opportunity here for heights in the order of 4 to 8 stories to complement what's proposed in this location. And obviously close to the GO station, but also close to the reconfigured Central Park as an emphasis point. And what we heard in terms of, this was probably the largest challenge, I think, in terms of a design perspective, was this large area of commercial land, non-residential land, and the market conditions is the tough part to get around in our minds. So we've shown a series of different types of prototype sites, if you want to call it that. The secondary plan prefers, as Julia said, prefers structured parking underground or above, but it also permits surface in behind. So we've shown a number of different iterations with buildings tight to the street within 4.5 meters, parking in behind, a combination of surface and structure on this block, fully structured on this, surface on here, and surface on there. So we've just shown a couple different iterations. I think this is a long-term project in terms of that amount of non-residential land, commercial, retail, office, institutional, civic, things like that. So it's going to take a while to absorb that type of land. And the cap on the height is 4 stories across this area, so we've identified again a street wall height of 3 stories and additional setbacks of only 4. So that's we certainly can answer any questions in terms of the thought process, but also any of the specific design guidelines or suggestions of that.
Do you have any idea what CN is thinking, what they might do in the short term with those lands? Because if you're trying to encourage development, south of the site, and in its current form, maybe there's some way that they could clean it up or something on a temporary basis until,
Our direction, I guess, is that it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I guess to the rail yards, you can certainly add to that, so.
Yeah, and Michelle might even know better, but the city's approached CN, how about relocating? And they said the amount of space you would need, I don't think it exists in the continuous stretch. So I don't think they're planning on relocating anytime soon. So,
no, but I meant, my understanding is that the lands that are in blue,
yes.
are they active lands right now?
Active.
As in the shut, their yards?
No, it was part of the
So it's
city's.
a buffer, as a
Yes.
buffer to the residential?
It's a 150-meter buffer.
Yeah, is CN have some idea that there might be something with, to create that buffer? Because, I mean, obviously, it'd be key, if I was to develop in that area, I'd want to clean up that edge, because without that edge being cleaned up, I mean, it'd be, makes it
Go
more
back to
clear.
the plan view, just so we can explain what is CN versus what is,
Which one you want?
just the plan.
First or second.
The plan, not reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of those blue lines are commercial. And then as you see above us, abutting us is the new GO station with its platforms and rails. So they've got their own landscaping component. In terms of, actually, can you go forward a bit? In terms of the edge, we'll be landscaping our edge, and along the top end there's going to be an easement, a trail easement, and we will be berming and landscaping that. So where the city's abutting, we're going to landscape and berm against CN, and then the rest is really Metrolinx.
So like a linear park along the edge, is that your?
Yeah, can you go to maybe your pedestrian routing plans? Yeah.
So this is the multi-use trail that goes along the north side of Stewart, and then it connects in with this more of a recreational trail that's on the south side of the rail. And so that's through an easement through the city. It'll be, as Julie said, burned and buffered on the north side
Yeah.
of the screen from the rail.
I'm also thinking though, north of Stewart, at the end of Tiffany, like those lands. Is there any
That's
property?
all. Well, we'll have our streetscape design,
Right.
but the rest is Metrolinx and the GO station. So, and they've submitted a landscape plan that we've reviewed.
So that length of property then from Barton, I guess, more or less, heading west down the hill along Stewart, and that the north side of that is going to be somewhat.
Landscape, yeah, there'll be streetscaping on our side and landscaping on the GO station side.
So this is the parking facility portion of the, this is looking north this way, the rail line obviously. So there's 3 access points that terminus at those 3 north-south streets with the surface parking areas in this location.
And that parking is for the GO station?
Yeah, yeah. But what you don't see on this plan is their landscaping aspect.
Beyond the parking.
Close, well, the south side, and then you'll have the platform and whatnot, and the rail.
Quick question about the new east-west street. So on the south side, where you're showing predominantly residential, but in the cross-section, I think I noticed that it looks like there's a kind of commercial awning. Do you anticipate on the south side of that new street any commercial use?
On this side,
Yeah, so in
Yeah.
other words, it's to mirror what should eventually come on the north.
we had not, no. We had strictly a residential.
Strictly
pattern.
residential to the
Yeah.
south.
We had lined we'd shown a concept lining the north side of the parking structure, 2-story above-grade parking structure with commercial use predominantly. Previous iterations that we had, we looked at a number of different options for, rather than mid-block street, a private lane and a second private lane to the north, so that we could have a double-sided commercial street. The challenge, I think, is just the amount of commercial land we have. So we're looking, if we want to emphasize anything, it's along Barton Street as ground floor retail, and then on a secondary along Caroline Street.
As that mid-block street terminates at Tiffany, is there any thought to a pedestrian connection up the bay, up the hill? Because like right now, the street sort of terminates in the way you sort of configured your massing plan,
It's
it
mostly-
looks like there might be a way to link the neighborhood.
It's mostly a grade issue. It's.
Well, I know it. I spent part of my youth on Tiffany, so
Yeah.
I know the area well, but my thoughts are that in my youth, I always thought about, having a connection up to Bay, because it would make life easier, but I'm just wondering, if you came down to the end of the mid-block street and you did have a pedestrian connection, that might also reinforce and support some commercial activity along Bay Street. So the neighborhood has some linkage to that, because it's going to take some time to get the commercial down into that sector, whereas the commercial on Bay Street might help from the pedestrian linkage there. Just a thought.
Yeah, sure.
So that's all privately owned land
Yeah.
there, I think, isn't it? There's no city there.
This is actually, these are the two public portions of the street. This one is more of a private driveway access, and this is the same in that location, is what's shown on the plan, at least as it stands, but it's certainly something we can look at.
Quick question, if you could get an image of the Central Park. In any of the iterations, and I guess this is, the diagram is based on what the secondary plan is asking for in terms of heights, but did you look at any greater density surrounding the park and facing the park?
Probably the high, in terms of the policies, what's permitted is up to a street town, so it'd have to be through some sort of process, planning process to revise that. We didn't look at it specifically. We did identify possibly stacked town to get a little more density, which requires a little bit more height if it's 3.5 stories. That's pretty much where we left it in terms of that. They're pretty tight blocks, I guess. It was tough enough to get the rear lanes in there with the garages. So.
And then a sort of related question, to the south, do you have a side yard relationship to the park? Did you explore one that had a facing units?
The challenge, I think, in this, we tried our best. I think the challenge was to get some sort of rear lane to back to get access. So what we put in the design guidelines is at least articulation of that side to wrap the corner, or at least front the street. It's not the ideal, I think, obviously, but it's, in terms of the space, it's very narrow.
If it wasn't, if this new infill wasn't smack dab next to 1- and 2-story homes, it would be an opportunity to go higher and denser, but we're trying to make that sensitive transition to the existing neighborhood that's a stable neighborhood that's been there for a very long time. So,
I think also, Robert, we tried to put the density at this node point. That is obviously relating to the park, but really marks that axis of the main streets going through this area.
I don't know, I think it could maybe have a strong base that relates in scale, but I think it's a nice opportunity for some higher density there. Because, the park is a large open space, to have some density next door to the park. So wrap, some low rise around the base maybe, and place some density above that. I think the impact is not going to be all that significant. The sun's to the south, so most of the shadows are falling on the park, for the moments during the day when that happens, but it certainly isn't going to impact the neighborhood to the south.
That's a question, excuse me, about the linear park at the end, what's the significance of the sort of pie shape or the fanning out?
For view purposes, mostly, I was trying to open it up a little bit. Try to widen it. Most of the views, I think, are going to come down the corridors, down to the south-north fashion. And so we tried to widen up the corridor there for view purposes, but also this width here is the same as the width there, and then it fans out to essentially double of that width to try to provide some interesting view to Bayfront Park.
Do you think you'll have any view from there? I feel like by the time you're halfway between Barton and Stewart, you're so low, you lose that view. And the only reason I ask is it's a significant chunk that you create sort of an awkward developable portion for a park that you know, the views are sort of uncertain at best. Yeah, so, it's questions about where they're at. I was wondering if there was anyone.
That was the main, what we heard was additional recreation space down there also, maybe if it's more casual space in that regard, so that was part of it, and then it sort of transformed in, okay, if there's any opportunities to widen it out, if there is any use. The rail line gets in the way, obviously, and the noise obviously is a huge issue for any outdoor amenity space there, so.
Was Caroline, sorry, I don't recall if Caroline, was Caroline identified to you as I noticed in your verbiage that you're using it as a recreational trail system?
Yeah.
Was that identified by yourselves, or was that directed by the city? Or?
It was, I think it was a combination of, from us, from what we heard from the community, but also from city staff in terms of, there's some direction, I guess, in terms of trails through the park.
Connecting,
Yeah.
The other thought about having some sort of plaza space at the end of Barton Tiffany before you get to the go is, there is at the end of Caroline, there's supposed to be a pedestrian bridge going up and over the rail into Bayfront Park. So the idea is to have a green corridor from Cannon Street.
Locations here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can start at Cannon, and if you're coming from downtown, you can have a green route with dedicated bike lanes all the way to the waterfront, other than taking Bay. So that was another reason to sort of punctuate the end of Barton Tiffany with an anchor. Whether maybe that's the most realistic spot for it, or it should be revisited.
Well, I think also our hope was that we lined this zone and this zone with street-related retail as well to reinforce that space. And then with the additional density we just talked about, with the two taller buildings there, that we created, again, a bit of a nucleus at this end of the street as a terminus, its connection to the park bridge, the GO station, that bit of retail, some open space, and the density provided by the residential.
So is CN committed to that overpass?
It's I think it's a city initiative. It hasn't been through an EA yet, Michelle. The one bridge has been through an EA, but this one has not. Both, there's a pedestrian bridge that's identified there, and over if you look at, that street, so that EA has been done for that one, but these were both recognized in the secondary planning process. So I don't know if we haven't done the EA for the Caroline Street one yet.
I think it's pretty fundamental to the development of those lands.
I would say
That's
so.
a major amenity plus.
That's a heavily used park.
Yes.
On
Yeah.
weekends, you would get a lot of support for the commercial activity in
Yeah.
the park. I have a question about the new street. I don't know if it has a name.
Mid-Block Street, we're calling it.
Mid-Block Street. It's got a nice ring to it. So it's exclusively zoned residential south of that street? On the
Yeah.
south side, and exclusively commercial on the north side?
The street itself is within the commercial designated land, given we've got enough of that. So we've
Right.
tried to maximize the residential
Right.
availability.
I just wonder about the character of that street and what it would be like to have all commercial properties on one side and what it would be like to live on a ground floor residential facing all commercial. And I wonder if, the market may end up building it as such, but would it make any sense to permit some ground floor commercial if so desired along there?
The Barton blocks themselves, they are designated to permit ground floor commercial. I would imagine that applies to the north side of the block too.
Oh, so it would be,
We'll have to take a peek at just the secondary plan policies to confirm that. I believe the entire designation here permits it on the street. It's just a matter of confirming if it's on
okay.
the
Yeah,
new street.
I understood that was exclusively residential, but if it was permitted on the ground, so
That's something we can confirm, look at the policies, and if it's a matter of a recommendation or a piece in the report to say it makes sense to have it on that street to animate it a little further.
to permit it, you could still have ground floor on residential if you wanted to, but it would be kind of weird to have a street that's all residential on the shady side and then all commercial on the sunny side.
We also have a challenge here in that because of the noise, our residential is intended to look in this direction rather than to the north. So that really those buildings, we either have to build solarium type scenarios to protect the windows from noise, or face and orient all the units, either as 3 units or whatever, to the south. So it's a bit of a tricky typology to develop because of the noise concerns.
Yeah, very familiar with it.
Yeah, well, of course.
So related to that, I think I heard you say that you'd explored other options where it was more like a lane?
A series of lanes,
Or a
yeah,
series of
so
lanes.
one that was in the same location, but a private lane, narrower, and a second one actually further north, divide up the blocks a little bit more. And to provide exactly that, an opportunity if it was commercial on both sides of the street, north, east, west, and north. But I think at the end of the day, in terms of, sort of the market thoughts is, if we're gonna get it, it's gonna be here or there, is probably the priority ones, but it's permitted for the most part throughout the area.
Just talk a bit more about it. You mentioned there were some different options of parking that you integrated in there. So in the middle of one of the courtyard, one of the commercial courtyards, you've got, looks to be like a 3-story, 4-story built up.
2-story, yeah, 2-story in
Oh, sorry,
that,
okay.
lined with commercial on the front side, and then there's a lot of interest obviously in some sort of green roof, especially for views looking out over something like that.
Is that, so that is taking advantage of the topography, that basically you're able to
It's pretty.
build a podium, so to speak?
Yeah, you probably comment, the real topography on the north-south direction really comes about midway through the park where it dips a bit, and then it starts to.
About a story.
Yeah.
It varies, obviously, but it's about 1 floor.
So these 4 stories from this location up here would probably be looked at as a 3-story.
So, and why would you have the Tiffany Street block as a surface park, because it's dug out already, and I was wondering why you don't just create a datum there and...
It could be the same thing. It could be.
2 levels of
Yeah.
surface on it.
We tried to show just a sort of there's so much unknown, I think, with this area in terms of what could. We're trying to show a number of different options in terms of what could happen.
Yeah.
End of the day, development plans are going to come in and they're going to afford
Actually, the way your Caroline Street and Tiffany Street are structured, it looks more like both of those streets will have, to me, it's more the connectivity to the station rather than the views,
Yeah.
because you'll get so much movement of both those streets through the parks.
Yeah.
So it's almost makes sense to line both those streets with some retail, because they're both going to be quite busy unless you're going to tell me that commercials, the Caroline Street is the priority street and the Tiffany is more just a relief street to get people moving out of there. So,
I think that was our thought process, was even
Yeah.
though it's permitted everywhere, we've identified in some locations, if you do get commercial, these are the ones that make sense. And obviously for Caroline's, because we put a lot of eggs in that basket in terms of the height, the density, the wider setbacks, and the multi-use trail.
at the moment, the density you show for the residential, you've already done some numbers and what kind of parkings and units?
We're looking
next to your
at,
development?
probably at the western end, which are these 2 blocks here, we're probably in the order of 250 per hectare. These are all based on entirely structured parking, we didn't show any surface
Below
parking.
grade.
Yeah. Or I guess it could be as part of the podium, but it doesn't make sense for 4 stories. Yeah, so across there, in these locations with a higher density, you're probably in the order of 350 to 400. Overall, it's about 1,200 units, 2,200 people, and then depending on the commercial, a few hundred employees.
Is it specifically prohibited to have structured parking at grade in this guideline?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Because that, in my opinion, that's starting to become a problem in Hamilton. That is, it's the least expensive way to do it, is just to build all your parking first and then put your uses up above, and it's a great way to kill a street. So
Well, what we could do, I'm not sure if I mentioned it previously, I think I did. The heights of 12 to 14 stories are not permitted right now with the secondary plan. So we would have to go back and do an OP amendment to do that. Another thing we could do is look at tweaking certain zoning aspects, such as if you're going to have structured parking, you should have commercial at grade. So those are the feedback we're looking for to
Yeah,
kind of
I think that's
write this
critical,
into a successful development.
It's not in the, they're not in the secondary plan policies, but they are in the design guidelines to say, you know, the structure that line it with something
Yeah.
active.
Yeah, so you can have ground level parking, but you have to have
Put
at
it
least
behind
a certain depth
Yeah.
of some kind of commercials to add something to the street. Because that model is showing up more and more in Hamilton
Yeah.
recently, where streets are being lined with parking structures in areas where it's really not very good.
Right.
Just a big
Right in
void.
the
Big
core.
void.
Yeah.
Big voids, so entire blocks are just being kind of decimated by parking at the grade.
Is there a water table issue here?
I think so. Yes.
It's more viable to build up in a podium than it is to build underground.
So, does the document I mean, I've skimmed through the rest of it, and I'm just curious, is there anywhere have you been asked for any direction from the city in terms of how this fabric may come together? Like, how does that central block get divided up and sold off to developers, as opposed to, I mean, you know, right now the form is obviously very large, and you've sort of indicated that, you know, you're struggling with the amount of commercials that make these big, huge, and someone mentioned earlier today about avoiding big box type atmosphere. So have you been asked to put any thought into how it might get divided up?
We've not so much for, obviously with a thought with the mid-block, obviously was divide that, because currently this is one entire block. We've tried to, on the commercial, non-residential side, we've tried to show a variety of footprints, so it's not large bulky buildings. The secondary plans do have restrictions in terms of caps on retail space and office space. So obviously in retail, they don't want the big box, and office, they don't want to sort of cannibalize from their downtowns. So we've had to look at that. So we've tried to show a variety of different floor plates, and we've tried to, in terms of the parking situation, so it could be phased over time. So that if the parking structure did, the city structure did come first, for instance, then it could be lined with these standalone buildings or vice versa, however it may be. But we haven't got to the implementation side of this.
Yeah, and to that point, we've been purposely, me and the team has been kept completely separate from our real estate division so that there is zero communication. So we're designing this, what would be the best layout, and then when we're all said and done, it goes off to real estate and they try to sell it, whether they chop it up or whether they sell a big block, or we don't know.
Okay.
So.
Question about the step backs, are they suggested or mandatory?
You suggest?
They're suggested, yeah.
Yeah, we tried to keep
1 meter after 3 stories?
a
and
minimum, yeah.
3 meters up beyond that?
3 to 5 for the 7th and 8th for 8-story buildings, and then a tower setback of an additional, go up 1, and an additional minimum 5. So. And most of the tower that we've shown is much further from the Barton side. It's oriented to the Caroline side. So,
And the first step back at 3, did that come from public feedback based on?
it was based mostly on the existing form in the area. Try to keep that, try to have that fourth, have a little bit of a relief, but nothing that affects the overall unit design or building design too much. So
So did you write in a meters height minimum or the base?
There's a three,
3 stories,
Street
but did you actually give it?
First floor.
no. We've identified the first floor as preferably 4.5, and then the additional ones we can comment on there.
Doesn't take much, like a bank wants 6 right away, so, because they want the proximity, you know. So, I think you should put some meters in there, because the definition of story can be interpreted a number of different ways, right? And how creative someone wants to get.
What's the density you're achieving on the 2 blocks adjacent to Caroline and Barton?
In these 2 blocks?
Yeah.
In the order of probably 400. The challenge is there's obviously secondary plan policies that have much lower density, but I think at the time we need to consider all structured parking, so it really changes things in that regard. Those are just a rough cut of the numbers that we did just to see where we're at in terms of.
it's an interesting issue from a real estate perspective, because the commercial, we have a similar site not only in LeBreton on the waterfront. It's an old industrial site. There's a lot of it still left there to be developed. And the interest we're getting, like in order to justify the structured parking, we need some large-scale retail. So the urban, like the Target urban store, like a Brooklyn store, like they'll do a very urban building. So from a urban design perspective, they're on board for that solution type of solution. But then we get the density up above. So to do it's funny because I'm looking at this and I know you want to reinforce Barton Street, and I'm thinking, I can see that large site having some attraction to someone who wants to do a couple of towers, whether it's an office building on a base, a large commercial base, and a residential tower on a large commercial base. So, I don't know. I don't know how you put some consideration into that. I mean, because I know you want to reinforce Barton Street.
Well, don't forget also that we're precluded from doing any residential in that zone. So we won't get, I don't think that's just not allowed for us to get residential in that big block south of the, or sorry,
Yeah.
north
of the middle.
of the street.
But you're suggesting the way in which their design study didn't anticipate height, but that they've recommended it along Caroline, you're suggesting an office component or retail component should
You might
consider
find
that?
that there's an interest to put large, but in an urban form, a large format retail store. We've got a site, we started out with trying to do 25,000 square foot food store, maybe a Shoppers Drug Mart, like a large, a mini kind of, and then along comes the Targets and the Walmarts who are willing to do an urban store, a 90,000 square foot urban store. And then, we're trying to work out all the wonderful parking for it, and then put an office component above it, and theaters and, restaurants and that kind of thing. Because here you've got such a commanding view of the water and the proximity to the GO station. So this is a CN mandate that you couldn't build residential below the land,
It's part of the settlement agreement,
Yeah,
part
the
of
old-
the setting sales
simply
sector.
because of the noise issue.
Yeah, and vibration.
So what the caps are, I guess, in terms of for the entire area, I think it's 10,000 square meters of retail, 15 of office, and then there's individual caps on per unit. So buildings can only be a certain amount. So those are the rules that we played by in terms of coming up with the concept of the main.
It's just the commercial uses make the viability step up, right?
Certainly, your point about the proximity to the GO is an office, a small office building. You can see that.
The reason not to put more residential towers on the other side was just because you don't want to block the views.
On which side?
So let's say where you've got the two towers, actually on the next street, let's say.
This way?
Right, so, let's say instead of creating two gateway towers on Caroline, you added two other towers on the other low blocks.
Yeah.
And so you had a series of towers.
Yeah.
So the reason not to do that is to block the blocking views from, there's generally just two-story housing on this side.
I think it was
So-
to transition with the existing neighborhood.
More
So I'm just saying
Yeah,
that
that
would
was-
allow you to incorporate more commercial use in those towers at the gateway side.
We had actually our last two iterations
I
was,
see.
we had one where it was more of a sort of a Brooklyn scenario where you
Right.
have north-south go up to 8 stories, 6, 8 stories, and an option that's flatter and then rise up. So that was the preferred one, I think, from visibility, but also that transition.
I got two, just really quick. I think the idea of courtyards is brilliant, and if there's some way, maybe we can start turning around implementation, if there's some way to put in force regulations that will encourage that, whether it's hardscaping elements or maybe a consideration increased height, we want better quality at grade, public, private, usable space. And then just a question, just because it came up in one of our last meetings, where the greatest height is, just to ensure, I think pages 77 and 78. So the greatest height is potentially on Caroline Street. And the two views of that building, the view from East Carp and the view from the lake, will be the most prominent, the most noticeable conflicts with the railway, of course. But you know, it's just the issue, and I think I saw something here trying to find out about point towers. Great. Just ensuring that there's a setback of the building from the lot line. Otherwise, we get into the building code conflict, and the last thing we want to see is, you know, the most prominent height ending up with a blank face. So if it's, I don't know where you put it in here, but to ensure some sort of direction that there is a separation such that that building doesn't end up being a blank line, some design interest to it.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have exactly, specified the maximum floor plate size, the setback from the podium on the street side, but I'm not sure we've addressed the back sides too.
So look at on,
So I think we could put
Yeah.
more, I think that's a good
like on
idea.
page 78, I mean, I'm not sure what the fabric is there. I think those are larger blocks, but the blocks did subdivide and having a property line essentially
Yeah.
mid-wall. Then any height needs to ensure an adequate separation or setback to avoid that circumstance.
Good. Okay, that was great.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Very informative. Thank you. Take 5 minutes.
Oh, I wasn't sure if that was.
Yeah, we're a little late. Has anybody got any strong food?
We can call it.
I have 5 minutes on the other, on the city. Just give us 5 minutes to get some coffee together.
Yeah, so we're, feel that you're giving enough feedback or
How do you feel? I think
we've got all the notes and we can just summarize.
I think you're involved in
Yeah. Our comments during, our questions basically were followed.
they've taken notes on it. I could see
And
them
Julie
taking
will
notes
see the
on it.
notes, we have notes, so if
Yeah, I
that's
think
okay.
we're good. I think there's like 3 Let's do that. They want to sit with
Yeah,
recommendations.
okay, we'll get the other one set up.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think we agree.
architect.
David Crummy, architect.
James Webb, planning consultant.
Sandy McIntosh, architect.
Robert Friedman, urban designer.
Yes, in this room, architect with Barton.
Philip Thomas, architect, Thomas McNally. Graham McNally, architect, Thomas McNally.
And I'm Shannon, I'm with Community Planning. I guess I'll kind of introduce what we've asked Graham and Philip to do. This is a city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment, so it's a little out of the norm for the planning application process. We expropriated the lands at 55 Queenston Road in 2011. The building was formerly the City Motor Motel site. It has been since demolished. We have retained Graham's doing most of it, to do development concepts for the site, from which we're going to develop prescriptive zoning regulations. The site will be sold privately and developed privately. So what we're trying to do is establish explicit zoning criteria to get a development that we want on the site in the future.
Okay. So, you see this is the site, just to orient you, Queenston Road. There's a street, Main Street. This is Main Street that comes through the downtown and kind of bends around at this traffic circle. These are just some images from the work that we did. I think you guys were all circulated the report we submitted. Just again, the plan to orient you, 4 o'clock sun shadow study of our 8-story tower and our 6-story sort of low-rise building, axonometric, and then a view. This is looking kind of northwest, and then just the site plan. So in the north we have townhouses along Main Street and along this new park, and on the south end we have a new commercial building that gives the street front to Queenston Road and then comes back up into this new sort of park area. We have a gap between the two buildings to allow people to flow from what's going to be this is on the LRT plan. There's a transit stop right here. So the idea is that there will be residents coming to access their condos in the back, and parking for some of the commercial spaces also in the back. So the idea being just to give people a way around the site. Okay. I'm going to switch over to my presentation, which is a few more images for us.
I'm just going to quickly fill you in. Based on what we've asked Graham to do, he does have to work within the policy framework, the official plan. We are not doing an official plan amendment through this process. So there are quite restrictive policies in that document. It's designated mixed-use medium. It does permit a wide range of commercial uses. It permits residential uses in the form of multiple residential. It can be standalone or mixed use. There's a 6-story height cap. However, that can be raised to 8 stories if a sun shadow study is done and the building is stepped back appropriately. And in addition, this site would be subject to the policies that are in the nodes and corridors planning for the citywide corridors, planning guidelines, and the transit-oriented development guidelines. So Graham's had to work within that framework as well to develop this concept.
So what you're showing could be just done through a rezoning process that would not require OPA?
Yeah. I will be creating site-specific zoning standards based on these concepts, or concepts that have been developed through this process.
Okay. So this is a view of the city. We're talking about a site right here. So it's the east of downtown. This is Main Street coming through. Just to zoom in a little bit. And this is the specific site. So I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at the transit-oriented design work that happened with the LRT study, but this site was already studied under that project, but it was the whole site. So our project is a little bit different if you're familiar with that one. So these are the footprints of the 2 buildings we're proposing. Again, commercial on the south, townhouses as a podium up north, on the north side, sorry. and then a tower rising out of that, so, and parking in behind. Some of the concepts we tried to work with in terms of generating the form, provide a continuous street wall to Queenston Road, that's here, and on Main Street. Step the buildings back so that you soften sort of the presence on the street, so you see they both go up 3 stories and then step back again, going down into the gap I was talking about. Respond to prominent locations on and access of the site, so Main Street access. This is the same sort of idea that came out of the transit-oriented design work. Main Street being so long and straight and focusing right on the site gives a great opportunity for putting a building that can sort of terminate that axis. It was a 13-story or 12-story tower in the TOD work, but with the OP we're limited to 8 stories. Provide for vehicular and pedestrian circulation. So we have circulation off of the secondary road, off of Main Street back here, into the parking lot that's in behind the building. And we've allowed for some pedestrian circulation, just again to link it up to what will be a transit stop out front, hopefully. And then I have the sun shadow studies, which would be required for an 8-story building, but just to show you the impact of that. So 8 a.m. on March 21st, 10 a.m., 12, 2, 4, and 5. And so just to give you an idea, these 3 buildings here are commercial buildings. These are some residential buildings, but in our work that we did, we found there's about 30 minutes earlier with the tower. They're getting shaded, but it's to our mind, that's not really significant. We also did this, which didn't show up in the report that you received, but checked the sort of 45-degree plane idea that people often use in urban planning. So to show that take the width of the street, 45-degree angle, and that's sort of a comfortable height, and you'll see both our buildings are comfortably below those planes. I think this side is probably the more important side. But given that the tower is on this side, this is the more residential side. And you can see again, we step back also from this side, from the east side and the north side, it steps back from the neighborhood. So I have all the plans. I don't know if you guys want to get into that or you want to have some questions first. I have all the plans next, which is probably a bit dry. So I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, Shannon?
I just do want to emphasize that what we've asked Thompson McNally to do is a zoning exercise. We really wanted them to focus on built form. We will have to present this to the public and explain, be able to show that it is going to be zoning regulations. So things like the facade, the treatment of the building isn't something we're looking for feedback on at this point. But setbacks, height, amenity space, circulation, that kind of thing, that's what we're looking for at this point. To make sure that the public understand that this is the kind of building that could be built, not necessarily this exact building.
I have a question. Why the setback from Queenston Road there?
That's actually required through our OP. It's a future road widening.
Another one, folks.
It is identified in the report as an issue. The ultimate road width for Queenston is the 45.
Yes, it's already a 5-lane road.
That's really unfortunate that you can't define that edge because of something that's very unlikely to happen in the future.
Question about the traffic circle, is that what you've shown there up to the property line? Is that an official change to the traffic configuration?
That came out of the LRT study, so it is the realignment for Queenston Road should the LRT be implemented. It has been drawn up through our traffic department.
I did miss mentioning, you see this line here? There's a line that carries straight through there. There's a hydro corridor that runs right there. So this is probably as far as you'd want to bring a building. Otherwise, you're going to be building underneath the power lines.
Or facing them.
Well, they're going to be going through their space, right? The public space. The lines are going to be there.
Yeah,
They are
this
there now.
part
They
is
run
underneath the
yeah.
power lines. Yeah.
Also noticed there's a proposed widening from Main Street as well.
Yes, it's not quite as significant as the Queenston Road. I think it's only.
Yeah, we're back from it. It's in there.
Sorry.
Right?
Yeah, I'll find it.
But what's the purpose of that?
It's again just the official plan requirement for a minor arterial road. It's 3.2 meters off of Main Street to the property line.
Oh, the hybrid core.
It's a tough site with a hydro line there. No thoughts of trying to bury those in?
Not at this point.
Well, it's difficult to use the park because the building can't relate to the park. Like your entrances are in the back of the building, right? I mean, that seems to be your
Actually,
initial
the-
reaction to that.
The official plan requires all principal entrances to be from the public sidewalk. So they would have to be oriented towards, I guess, the park entrance and the,
Yeah, because it's a grand opportunity for ground floor restaurant, commercial uses.
and that is what Thompson McNally had recommended for the ground floor of the Queenston building, an active street front. Again, that's policy oriented. Both the nodes and corridors and TOD require an active street front in addition to the policies of the
How wide is the easement for hydro? Is it basically the extent of that public or the park?
You have a location.
There's a couple of lines up here, 6 feet outlet from there to the other one straight.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
There's the.
There's a few pictures in the package that kind of show what it looks like.
Can you talk a bit about the surface parking? I'll be a bit more leading about it. Was there surface, I know it's a cost issue, but is it an issue about the transition from the single-story houses up to the tower? And did you try flipping the scheme by having the tower on the back with a podium, let's say going higher than what you're showing? There are a couple of questions there.
So, okay, so.
And increasing your public space in the process.
So you're saying put the parking on this side? I mean,
Yeah, either increase, have a level that's buried, not buried as in creating a podium lining with some retail frontage that faces the park, so that the parking is hidden, and then that allows you to set back the tower further and proposing something higher.
again,
We did it one scheme where the house had to pull that back down, because it's not a rezoning.
again, an LPM.
Yeah, it limits it to the 8 stories.
Big stuff, so.
Yeah.
So it's like,
But I mean, like, I'm not sure I totally get where you're moving the pieces, but we wanted to make an active street front
yeah.
on Queenston. There's going to be a transit stop there, so that sort of has to be.
Yeah.
And then given that this is the residential side, we wanted to have residential facing that side. And then we could switch the parking to
Yeah.
this side, but then there's guidelines and it talks about putting the parking in behind the building. And so I think that to have parking building is kind of not the model that the city would be looking for.
There's actually an official policy that requires, or prohibits parking, drive-throughs and stacking lanes from between a building and a property line.
Okay.
So
But in this case, because you've got those hydro lines, to make it viable, I know what I would do. I would think you'd want to move the tower back towards the east to increase the separation, particularly if you're going up 8 stories, because those hydro lines would be pretty visible. So maybe those policies have to be rethought a little bit on this site, because as much as you appreciate those policies in terms of what they're intended to do, I'm not so sure they apply so well on this property, because if you're going to put density, I think I'd be putting it there, but I'd be placing it eastward into the site and further away from the hydro lines.
What would you put there in place of the tower? Surface parking?
Well, that's the catch-22, where you do some kind of a decked facility that looks, you can treat the facade. So the parking is not, it's part of the base of the development maybe, and so it gives you that edge, but at the same time, try and position the building further away from the hydro.
Can I ask a question for, this is more directed to the city. You're asking us to comment on his 8 stories appropriate this location. But you don't want us to say it should be higher. You're saying you want to know 8 or less.
Yes,
Just
I won't
clear.
say.
I mean, you can tell us,
I don't know
but,
if it's speaking out of turn, but I think most of the panel thinks it could be higher, but
and they're not
We
gonna
can say
disagree.
8 is not appropriate, should be higher.
yes, minimum.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm just confused at the direction we're getting there.
Yeah.
Can you go back to, there was a design study showing the angular plans? So is that, so the TOD guidelines talk about using the angular plans, but they measure it, they go,
Center line of road, isn't it?
no, they start at 80% of the width of the arterial road. So have you gone from property line, or are you actually using that
I've gone
80%?
from 80% of the, so the total road width is whatever it is. And so it's, this is about 80%.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Curious if you looked at a scheme that didn't have the break right into 2 buildings?
We did, yeah. So a challenge to the site, I would think, is that there's a face here that faces the park, and how do you get people walking to a front door that's over here? And then also, you know, if it's not here, how do you allow people to flow into a building in the back, let's say, or from the parking to the front? We did look at other schemes. This seemed to be a nice scheme because as you come down Main Street as well, it gives you some separation. You know, it sort of gives you 2, sort of, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but you have sort of this gap between 2 buildings, which seem to create a bit more interest at the end of the axis.
I mean, one tower is the end of the axis, and the other building is, if it were low, it kicks you off to the right. And the flow of the traffic does move off to the side, but there's a pretty strong axis which could be marked if it were taller than 8 stories. Kind of gets lost at the moment, you know. If you 100 meters away, you don't really see it.
Given the amount of open space to the south where the DeWilt is, my reaction is to place the density closer to the south end of the property.
Is there, in terms of the, this being identified as for LRT, have they identified, I mean, I've looked through the TOD, I don't remember this one being specific, but is it marked to be a station, a stop, or a?
There's a station proposed at Queenston Traffic Circle.
So where exactly would that?
Pretty sure it goes from about here to somewhere over here, something like that.
So they were using the road widening to build some kind of covered structure, or is that?
We're taking lanes. What it's with. So I think it's 5 lanes, and you're taking it. So it's 5 lanes right now. And you're taking 1 lane, and then there's traffic, and then 2 on the other side. So I'm taking it.
Oh, it's in the center of the street. So that's why they need the widening.
Now, at the time this was done, this site obviously hadn't been expropriated, and the thought of the plaza could be utilized has been discussed as well. We're not actively working on the LRT anymore, but I did talk to the planner who was working on it. So there may be opportunity to use something like this plaza as kind of a station location and use the full site instead of just the small portion that they're proposing right now.
Would that reduce the setback requirement? The widening?
I don't know. It's out for circulation, so
I don't
I'm waiting for feedback.
believe the widening has any direct relationship to LRT, does it? I mean, there's a road
No.
widening all
It's
along
the-
the main street, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the ultimate road width for the full arterials.
Yeah.
So there's exceptions along the way. There's certain parts.
So this diagram uses that road widening?
I believe so. It builds it in here.
So you really can't build that without requiring the site to be east?
So are you asking whether that LRT scheme uses the road widening space? I believe it does.
No, I don't believe so. No, I don't, you're not allowed to do anything
The
extra
extra space is
road
not
widening.
used.
No, well,
to use on that.
the road could get wider, but I don't think it does in
The
this one.
LRT doesn't use the actual space on the road
It
widening.
doesn't demand,
No.
it doesn't require it.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
So once the LRT builds the road widening, is some future expansion, which they have.
Well, if you have an LRT, you shouldn't need one. That's clear.
Yeah, without the road widening, the scheme would have been quite different.
Well, our
You're kind of caught between policies in the sense that if you're going to put an LRT in, then you should probably want to you probably want to eliminate that setback because it's definitely impacting.
That's an OP amendment to eliminate the setback.
Yeah,
That's the
sure.
problem.
City
We're
owns
trying
it.
to avoid an OP amendment. By-
Just for clarification, the policies in the OP actually do permit, the staff basically have discretion as to whether or not you can take the road widening, and so for your just circulation of these plans to staff, we're hoping to get some additional feedback on that right away.
Oh, so it's at the discretion of staff to use the roadway.
Sometimes you can ask for a 6-meter sidewalk in lieu of a road widening. So if you're willing to take what would have been your as of right, front property line development at 0, move it back a couple of meters to the curb to increase the width of the pedestrian space, then you don't have to address the road widening because you provided something in lieu of because of transit.
Oh, well, then you may be able to move that building.
Yeah.
Look,
So it sounds like, we had a series of comments that came around from, I'm not sure exactly what they were responding to, but the first kind of go from staff comments that it stated we had to respect the road widening. So it sounds like there's another sort of go around that's going to happen.
well, that would be from Public Works, I guess, who
Yeah.
are trying to protect the road widening, but I guess there is instruments available to open that discussion.
Yeah, at the time of those comments, there wasn't actually a concept that was associated with the circulation. It was on principle we had purchased and to identify any issues, so they would identify it, and yeah, as Michelle said, it would be through circulation and kind of discussions back and forth whether or not the full width would be taken.
So maybe for your zoning, you should have a second run at it in the sense that if you're able to convince Public Works they didn't need it, given that you got LRT at your doorstep, that you might be able to move that built form closer to the street.
We might be able to increase density a little bit by expanding the footprint.
Ultimately, the setback will be essentially the same. I mean, whether or not the road widening is taken from a zoning perspective, that minimum maximum setback will probably be established at the same as it is proposed, whether or not the road widening is taken. It'll likely be a maximum setback based on the policies anyways.
No, if you had a 0 meter setback, wouldn't you be able to move that building, or is that your property line now?
No, that's at the ultimate road width.
Okay, so if you eliminated the ultimate road width and went back to where the existing property line is now and used the 0 meter setback,
You can build right away.
you'd have a different solution.
So you said that road pattern was developed by traffic, and so is that official that's being adopted or not?
I don't think there's any sense of official until we know what the process is with LRT.
The only reason I
But it was
asked
done
is
to our
obviously,
standards.
obviously your scheme
Yeah.
depends on having that space, right? If the traffic circle stays, it kind of,
And that was the reason for the amenity question. We do have a sufficient amenity with this plan, but is there something we should be building into the zoning bylaw? Should that not happen, how should we reflect that on the state?
For what it's, we did actually alter slightly the traffic drawing that we received, because there's a little like drive-by existing, sort of getting into the traffic circle generally. We've taken that out of it as well, recognizing that we think this street should really be seen as more of a residential street. I think like there's some small businesses in here, But I think, in 20 years, are there still going to be small businesses? It's up for
So, sorry, it's kind of confusing. Are they eliminating the traffic circle?
Well,
Is that
here's the,
proposed?
yeah, this is the, but it's not that.
Well, I think it's if LRT goes ahead.
If
traffic
LRT
circle
goes
comes
ahead.
out.
They will have to realign the road to the common.
Yeah.
And all those streets become two-way streets. Is that-
The drawings are circulated there, I don't know exactly.
So then the triangular wedge is going to become parkland?
Sorry.
Driveway access. No, you realize the properties that are trying to get away.
That'll become a park.
Yes.
I don't know why they would just run on
That'll sort of
This here?
integrate with
But
the
I assume that that would extend the rest
I
of
don't
the.
know, I don't know if there's plans for that.
Should actually be on the street, but
So it would remain actually part of the right of way. There's some servicing elements underneath that would have to stay, but to the person walking down the street, it's going to be a green space that would read as a park. But from a technical point of view, it would still be part of the right of way.
Something funny about that traffic. Just trying to understand how vehicles move through there. You can, going from coming down from Main Street, you turn left there
Yeah.
to go into your site. And so where this kind of forward point? So I'm coming down here, I can turn left to go in here. Can I come out here as well?
Yes.
And if I'm coming down this street to go to Main Street, come down this way and then go up down there.
I should also say that out of the circulation, it was identified that we would need a traffic impact study.
Yeah.
So we retained a consultant to do that. Based on this concept, while this concept is probably not what we will officially base the zoning on, based on the comments we get out of circulation and public consultation, they're studying it kind of as the highest and best use and analyzing all the intersections, how they'd be used and if any changes needed to happen.
If let's say one of the suggestions is that you could go higher, does that alter your parking height? Of course. And so does that throw you into a different solution, like a deck or below grade? Or?
We currently have.
You said that was desired, just
Yeah, I mean,
so.
yeah, currently there's not enough, given what the density we have, we already have some underground parking at this point.
You do already have.
Yeah. How that plays out in the final zoning of how many spaces are required per unit, I think that might be something that can be talked about, because we went off of what the current zoning is, and then that's bicycles, car share, all sorts of things can bring that number down. So, anyways, so yes, it would have an impact, but there's sort of lots of open questions there too.
So from a development standpoint, if you're already going level below, doesn't that allow you to increase your excavation, but doesn't that allow you the flexibility to increase density and pay for all that excavation ultimately, and possibly requests go for higher density?
But to exceed 6 stories would be an OPA, is that right?
8
stories. 8 stories.
But see, there's a lot of that. I think it's the surface parking that irritates me. The presence of it, because all of Hamilton is prevalent with this. It's a killer on the street. So it's
Well, it's pretty
curious
well,
about.
pretty well buried in the middle of the block here. It's not something you would perceive.
But if you are going down and you could accommodate below, then you could create more green space or more developable area, I guess is what you're after.
I guess even if you're building condos there, the green space you have as condo is really your balcony, because the public space down there isn't really pleasant enough to use. It's more arrival space, because you're arriving in your car and then it's just flow through. I'm not sure if it's a desirable connectivity, by the way, that that's shown there. you'd almost, so I'm trying to see how you would make condos more livable by having more outdoor space or green space. And somehow that land at the back seems a question mark in my mind of how.
If the whole building could slide it south without the road widening, and we could go higher, then the space between the two buildings, which is rather tenuous at the moment, and it's sort of, with being similar heights, it's not great. Visually does it, it's not marking the end of the axis. It's attempted to move, the space between the two buildings could become something which is more significant and more connected to the space behind the buildings.
Yeah, and if you did a point block, I mean, if you look at the double load parking at the back, that's roughly the middle aisle, the center of the middle parking is about 20 meters safe from the property line, which is a decent separation to the properties to the east, within that 20-meter rule of thumb. And you took the north tower and slid it to that midpoint, and you created another point block, more or less in alignment with that center aisle southward, and increase the height. You'd have greater separation from the hydro. At the same time, leave you a bit of a rear yard that you can deal with your ramp to your garage. Increase your front yard facing west, so that the park has more opportunity to integrate with an entrance or something off for the buildings. Because I don't think it's harmful to have your entrances facing the corridor, particularly if the buildings are split to the east a little bit, and increase the separation between the buildings so that it's more significant. Because if both towers were 12 stories, for argument's sake, and you had 17 to 20 meters between the point blocks, and you're able to shift that southern one towards the street, then you...
So you're talking about...
You want some sketch paper?
No, I don't want to sketch paper, but I think you want to write zoning around this right now, right? Is that what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're talking about entrances here,
You're limiting it.
here, as opposed to here and here.
Sorry?
You're talking about entrances off the corridor, off the hydro.
Yeah, because if you're coming from the transit, you're just going to walk across the, why couldn't you walk across? I mean, you could have a rear entrance in terms of a drop-off, but something between the towers for that matter, but in terms of common space. But I just think you'd want to pull the buildings away from that hydro corridor and take them up.
As it stands, the policies, because this park isn't there, and when it gets sold, probably won't be there yet either. The policies of the OP do require that all principal entrances be from the public sidewalk, so it would be required to be from that side of the building anyway.
I have a question like this, from what's permitted standpoint, it fits nicely within all the rules, but is it a viable development? Like, is there enough in here to support a level of underground parking? Like, a level of underground parking there is probably more than $1 million. It's very expensive to build. Have you looked at it from that standpoint? It might be, if you just look at what's permitted and you do a zoning envelope like you're doing, it might just be unsellable because it just doesn't make sense as a development. I don't know, you kind of have to look at it from both ends, I think, like what would work and what's permitted and where's the common ground in between the two of them.
How many units does that amount of parking support?
Have you assumed one whole level of underground and the same as this and then this in addition?
It's not a full, it wouldn't have to be a full thing. It's, we have 98 spaces underground, 52 on the surface. Unit-wise, we have 44 in the north building. And 44 in the south building.
So 80 or 90 units.
90 units altogether. Some of those, a mix between townhouses in the north and then the more apartment or condos and towers.
Well, with if you're providing bike share and car share, would it not be reasonable to base like one spot per unit? Like, is that not generally within the realm of being supportable?
I'd say one and a quarter is probably best here, yeah.
Really?
Well,
Well, you get transit, you should be able to go like 0.5.
yeah. I
Now,
would say less
practically
than that.
speaking, as a developer, you probably want to go 0.7 or 0.8
Yeah.
with transit, and not take a chance on moving units without parking, but
So how many are on the surface here?
52.
52. That's probably getting close to
It's like,
enough to support that.
And if the parking requirements were different, and the street widening was different, and where the entrances to be was different, the height limitations were different, then it's an entirely impossibility.
No, but it is possible to get some parking relief without going to
Yes.
official plan amendment. So
Yeah,
I think
that's
you want
one
to
of the
understand
big factors.
how far can you reasonably push that to make it viable, because I doubt very much that this would work with a level of underground parking from a development numbers standpoint.
no, you need
It'd be tough to make it work.
more units.
Yeah, you need more units. You know, the other thing that, can I go over your point for a minute? The other thing that you could consider is that if this was grade level parking and then you built a parking deck over it for a second level above grade, and then expanded the width of this building all the way down to here, you could probably add another 50% more units and put the parking, not go beyond the height and still, and add significant density to the site. Without, you know, the biggest pushback you'll get is if you start shading leads, right? If you start shading too many of these private homes, but you could probably get away with, you know, even if you took one floor off and expanded this footprint all the way down to here, just had a drive-through into the parking levels, something like that.
The tall thing could still be where it is, but it steps the other way, so that the shading is reversed.
I think we should,
You're trying to get away from the
we should move to questions, and then maybe we'll form some comments.
voltage.
So you can design a solution for an quarter. So,
There may be ways to get more density this way, to make it a more attractive development.
so why
parcel.
don't we formalize our comments such that we make some recommendations, which is why we're here, right? So if the comment is that you reconsider the density in exclusive of the OP, given that you might move the building on the south face, have that land to work with. And one of the other comments might be, recommendations might be to reposition the buildings a little further away from the hydro corridor to improve that separation, because that would be an issue from any marketing perspective, that if someone came along to look at these lands with that current zoning on it, they may want to try and increase the separation from the hydro corridor and look at possibly 2 point blocks or something, with or without decks. That's an economics discussion, that aspect. I'm not sure, is there any other comments, or you want to?
What were the questions? There were a series of questions that were specifically
Yeah.
asked. What was the name
So one
again?
was is the aid appropriate, which I'm hearing is no. The other was, does the step back adequately reduce the impact of the development? I heard maybe a different orientation to the setback might reduce the shadowing. Should the zoning regulations establish a specific distance or height for the stepping back? So as it's proposed right now, this is 3 stories on the ground, from the ground, and then a step back. So A, is the 3 stories appropriate, and then what should that step back be for us to build it into the zoning regulations?
I think the 45-degree plane that you showed, Graham, is a reasonable guide for stepping back.
Yeah, I'm not sure it would be necessary to shrink wrap the stepping on the inside. I think they're, based on the comments, are perfectly viable schemes that don't have a separation between the north building and the south building. I'm not sure it's necessary nor advisable to shrink wrap that as the solution.
It's
More of a street edge.
Yeah,
you
it's
think
more of the
should be-
street edge in relation to the surrounding neighborhood as opposed to.
Right. So in other words, if the southern building was moved closer to the street edge, and you had the setback at the top of the third floor, that would be reasonable interpretation. Where it is now, given that you may not use that road widening, it's really not something you, what's the point writing it into the bylaw? It makes sense if it's up at the street edge. It doesn't make much sense if it's stepped back already.
Well, but if you had a plane from the other side of the street and you were permitted to come closer, then you could. But you could still keep that 45-degree plane as you're stepping back.
Queenston's so huge, you could put like
Yeah, that's why your cross section on
huge tower.
Queenston shows opportunity there, right, to use more height. I mean, the reality is the shadows are there irrespective of whether it's 6 or 8 on that south building, right? I mean, your property is encumbered by the shadow in any event.
And the other general comment that I would make is that in places in cities where you get diagonals meeting a regular grid create really interesting spaces. And I think if the city wants to get the most from this site, you really need to think about designing the leftover spaces which will become parks. And right now, what I'm seeing here and what I'm seeing in the diagram, and I know that wasn't part of your assignment, I think is leaving a lot. It's a lost opportunity. In other words, you could create a lot of amenity and a lot of value for the site by designing park space and with the realigned roads to reinforce the new building.
Ultimately, Robert, I think that all of this should be seen as one space, right?
Yeah, yeah. The whole,
I know it's not in your control, but you'd want to try to lead the design of that space. So.
Yeah, I mean the way it's shown right now, it's very difficult to perceive that new north-south street as the address for the new building. Right? It's too removed. Not that it can't be. I mean, with landscaping that's sympathetic to the buildings, I think that could be a lot more convincing.
Was it the intention to write in the zoning that it must be 2 buildings? Is that the intention or the?
We could.
I mean, I think that's a solution. I don't think
Yeah, I think
that'd be a change
flexibility.
to shrink wrap.
Is there also, I mean, is there a view of the site that is the most prominent? I mean, the angles are all really funny, but is there one vista or viewpoint of the site that becomes the most prominent?
Main Street corridor.
And is there any, I mean, would you write into the bylaw that is where the majority of the massing should be?
Or something about that axis should be emphasized somehow through articulation of the solution? Is that too prescriptive?
Sorry. I'm just designing something, sorry.
Yeah. No, but I mean.
No, we would take the shape of that lower building and plan
Yeah.
and make that the shape in elevations as you're coming down Main Street. They're 45 view.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, conceptually, guys, conceptually, if that corridor was identified as an important aspect of the design, is that the end of the Main Street corridor should be emphasized with some sort of articulation or.
But it's too stubby, it won't be seen more than half a kilometer anyways.
So it's only 8
It needs to be
stories.
something really significantly seen from any distance.
Well, but you're limited to 8 stories.
But, I mean, the other way, the truth is that an axis, it opens up as you redirect yourself to Queenston Road, sorry. And so, your axis is just a single line, right? So the height can vary. It's not just a point tower, just at the end of that street. The form can change to become something unusual. It sort of takes over the whole site so that it allows you more flexibility in the way you do the massing and create a more signature site that way. It's not just where Main Street goes into the site.
So I
It can't be
think
limited to that.
the question is it appropriate to zone it for two separate buildings, or is that too prescriptive?
Yeah, I leave it flexible. Someone wants to come in with a north-south tower, right? But it's got a,
But do you think it's appropriate to write in something about respecting the view along the Main Street corridor and designing something that responds to that in some way?
yeah, that's in some way, but that's kind of a given on that property in a way that you gotta, where else do you position the building?
Well, it's not a given for everybody. It's just how to make sure that you emphasize that without being too prescriptive and too restrictive for a development. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to my earlier comment, right, that these sorts of diagonal meets grid moments don't happen that often in the city. To not recognize that would be a real shame, right? So that some language, but recognizing the termination of the Main
In
Street.
rerouting the traffic, we've lost the circle except for a ghost image, which is, left on the surface. So the whole Queensland traffic circle sort of it's gone.
Is that north-south connection critical? Like the piece of roadway that's part of Strathern, like if Main Street continued to the west in front of the buildings at the edge of the North Park, I guess, it sort of jogged around, and you're able to get rid of the roadway that's separating the circle from and create a triangle that is part of like one parcel. And then the two buildings confront that parcel with a much larger open space.
It may be kind of beyond the realm of this.
No, I realize it is, but at the same time, it's an urban design panel, right? So we can talk in some broader terms here.
So build a laneway across the front of those buildings.
Right,
rather than-
there's a private driveway access.
There already is a street there, anyway.
Yeah. Oh,
Because the circle.
I'm just thinking that those two parcels of land are
So I think
separate.
well, I'm saying is I think it is doable.
Bring it around like that,
Yeah.
and it just becomes contiguous to the park.
And then we can even put this.
Sorry.
Well, the
It would
other
be a
question
funny-
is the plaza provides section density.
Shape of the park, essentially.
I don't know the answer. So you gotta have some private amenities.
So that's all.
So I know it's a limiting site. I think you can't, especially because you're telling us.
I mean, it's almost like
space.
that, just join the traffic.
Somehow it has to be.
I think the south,
Considered.
the center of the east is
That's all I think.
Yeah, it should
Mental
be,
block.
exactly, it should be one big development.
You gotta move on. Okay.
So did we answer all the questions?
Services.
I think that we said 8 stories is appropriate, or 8 stories is a minimum. Does the step back reduce the impact? Yes.
Which setback, so just to be specific?
The 3
said
meter
that-
step back at the base, I mean,
Well, or the
Meter setback.
45-degree angle.
45-degree angle.
The 45-degree angle, which would facilitate stepping back if you were that close to the...
yeah, like if you have a building in the center of the site, you go higher than 8.
If you put one building in the middle, you could go straight up without stepping back, or as long as you step back to a 45-degree plane.
45-degree thing is an interesting discussion in itself.
That
Yeah,
means you can have a
There's
20.
places where it's applicable and there's places where it's really not. Because I mean, in a dense environment, you don't have that. I mean, do you have it downtown,
but they're talking...
downtown Hamilton? Could you ever apply a 45-degree to the,
No, but they're
An offsite,
talking
for
about this
example, you could-
specific site, which is a lot of very low-density residential, so...
45 is a pretty arbitrary number. I don't think 45 was picked as a very, a very
Yeah, I agree.
careful way.
I agree. I mean, it's the public realm is at the base of the building, right, in terms of the impact, shadowing aside. So if you took that site and you wrapped your setback, your low-rise setback piece around the perimeter, said there's a zone that can't be any higher than X, then after that, you've got an inside schedule that says it can be Y, and if you want to predicate it on the 45-degree, because you obviously get to the center of the site, it could go higher. I mean, you gotta give some flexibility, because anyone who's gonna buy that property is gonna come back and likely not work within those to the fullest, intent.
So should the zoning regulations establish a specific distance height for the step back?
So for
Yes.
me,
Because otherwise-
that is the actual distance. How far step back does that fourth story have to be? Is there a number? Is the 45-degree angle enough? Is it flexible enough, or is it prescriptive enough to get what we want?
So it's Main Street's 26 meters, that means you can go 26 meters high to lot line.
26 meters high?
No, we're,
80%.
But you say you're looking at 4 stories and then you have to step back a certain distance, that's pretty prescriptive, and the developer might say, I don't like that number, and then you'd all get thrown open again.
so the question is it appropriate to prescribe a step back, or is it,
Adequate to establish the 45-degree angle?
or just leave it and negotiate it with the developer? Like, is it appropriate to create
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly allowing more flexibility if you just put in 45 as the general rule. And then
that's more flexibility?
steps. Yeah, and then you
That will,
allows a number of different solutions as opposed to
come up 3 stories and go back 2 meters and come up 4 stories.
So we have that exact regulation as it stands in the bylaw for institutional purposes. So that's kind of what I'm basing that thought off. Is it something that prescriptive that you go up 3, you go in 3, you go up 1, you go in 1?
Or is the plane at whatever angle a better solution to allow more flexibility?
I think you want to allow more flexibility. If you want the state to develop, allow more flexibility.
Yeah, and then it's subject to the scheme.
Can I suggest that the angle might be different? Queenston Road, it's on the south side, the angle might not be 45, it might
Yeah, it
be
might be
56 or 60, or
something,
maybe
so-
60, 45, maybe,
So depending on the
round
widths,
numbers.
yeah, the widths of the roads would determine the angle, but
Which
if they
roads
have
and
a...
which direction, which side of the site it's on.
And then in those rules, you could literally build a pyramid if you wanted to, that would conform to those. I mean, that might be one of the solutions you get.
These houses here from something which, if that's important there and that gets too tall, then that sort of screws these people here.
That's right, yeah, so it's 45 feet.
Yeah, on the north half of the property, I think on the south half, it's,
It could be
look
less.
at the open space on the south side of this property. There's no, very little impact on any adjoining lands there. The likelihood of them changing from commercial to residential is probably less likely.
What's the zoning on the other side of the road there, all those surface lots?
The Ford, it's a Ford dealership, it's a Ford parking lot, they're all H, community shopping, commercial zoning.
No residential.
It allows for a moderate amount of mixed use, but the commercial is really no mixed use.
But you're not going to shade any of that anyway.
Well, we would.
It's all matter. You're good, you're not that.
Create an address.
I appreciate the desire to maintain flexibility for a developer, but I think like if we, especially on the north side, if we just go for maximum flexibility, let the guy do whatever he wants, then we might be allowing a building which isn't going to be a good urban building. Like if we have a 5-story podium on the north side facing one
No,
story.
no, sorry, I don't think anyone was saying whatever they want. I think rather than mandating, up 2 stories, then a 3-meter setback to say within whatever.
The 45
fits
degree
within the
plane,
45.
you're saying is appropriate.
Well, the only thing, like, the 45-degree plane though, you could go up
Quite high.
5 stories
Oh,
and not intersect it.
Well, is that
maybe
right?
that,
Or 7.
You could actually almost do
So,
8.
yeah.
On a 26-meter road,
no.
45 angle plane gives you 26 meters high, which 3.5 or 3 whatever is almost 8 stories.
So is it possible to pick the right number and maybe the 45 starts, at some point in the middle of the road so that you actually set a point where you don't allow for a building of a certain height with no modulation on that edge? Or-
The other question the architects is maybe you have to get the transition from base, middle, top of the building. Does it have to be a step back, or can it be achieved by
That's
a
right.
design?
Yeah, we've done, like at top of the 7th floor, for example, a projecting soffit around the perimeter of the building. Then the 8th floor has to be back 3 meters from the edge of the soffit, and the overhang. And that creates a step massing effect. And from the street, the impact is the same as stepping it. Because sometimes at 45, that setback can be onerous in terms of the building structure. And affordable housing in terms of what may be the solution for this location. You cannot necessarily afford to wet take a building because of the additional cost of it, right? So there are other means to achieve the same, reducing the impact to the street by using other elements within the building to do that. And then I think this diagram indicates that the center of the property could easily take more density, as is the south face, right?
But you're right, yeah, that could have a pretty imposing street wall, you've got 45 degree.
I think I've seen in other places where it's a condo. You can do 3 stories step back, and then anything above that.
Yeah,
has
yeah.
to
And
be-
then above you go straight up,
No, that's a good.
deal with an element at the 7th or 8th floor.
So something like that would be appropriate, that isn't too prescriptive and allows for some different forms.
Is there a status like a three-story
From
base?
the facade, the 45 degree.
We say 6
From the
points.
street
We
line.
say
It's just, you prescribe the base
Yeah.
to be something, and anything above that.
Has to be the 45 degree.
Yeah. Or shallower, whatever, depending on, well, I guess the 45 degree from Queenston Road
Yeah.
gives you pretty quick height.
10, 12 meters.
More than your
Because it's like,
permitted, yeah. So something like that, a combination of a prescription for base and then a setback and then the 45 degree.
About the numbers of buildings, the massing, because, for instance, this is the direct view you were talking about from Main Street, right?
Yeah.
The middle portion could become a flat wall. So if you're doing a tower or a high building, you'd want to see the slimness of it. So are we allowing a prescription for more mass? Like, it's a surface mass when you're going to just see a flat wall potentially if the building goes higher, as opposed to a tower that gets carved up. You're allowing it to carve up on the sides, but the middle of it could get very dense. Right? So to me, it's the potential for an axis kind of connection. You'd want to see a slim tower or something that steps down gently, rather than something that becomes wall-like, going across the site, right? Like going sideways that way.
Well, I think that's the idea behind the gap between the buildings, is it to make...
Sort of, except, when it got clipped to 8 stories.
Plus, there's limitations to how large a plate would be in terms of number of units.
Yeah.
So whether you build a plate right across or not is somewhat debatable because it's not the larger plate. And phasing and that kind of thing, you want to build one building, move it out, and then build a second building.
So some of the papers suggested some sort of guideline in the, some guidance that this is important on the site, the street edge on Queenston is important. The neighbours to the north and not doing something which, shades them too much is important, and the access of Main Street is important, whatever you do.
Yeah.
These are important things to deal with.
Then you could have a demonstration plan. Gives them a couple different options, drives them in the direction of thinking.
And that is an option because the property will be sold through a RFP, so.
That's right, you have control over that relative to your demonstration plan.
So when you sell it, you'll ask for proposals and sell it to the
That's
proposal
what
that you like the most.
real estate has told me. I'm told there's a few different options, but that's kind of the one that they're geared towards.
I mean, typically the municipalities offer concessions if there's a way to improve a scheme. So, opponent comes forward with a suggested improvement, and maybe you give 12 stories in part of the property, and because you're getting something at the base, and they're contributing to the park development, and blah, blah, blah. And there's a way to improve the overall solution because you're in control of the land. You can get a higher quality development.
being said, when the property is sold and an eventual development comes forth, it would likely come before DRP again as a true design concept.
That's right, and at that
See
point,
it all again.
the principles we would simply apply again, right? So-
That's what, yeah.
Study your vote.
Very useful.
Take away, break the rules, but it's sort of, I mean, there's the constraints that are sort of like higher to where it is.
Yeah.
So some of the constraints are removed, it's something entirely different.
Well, I think the road widening on
Yeah.
Queenston is a huge.
So this has been circulated.
To me, that's like, particularly if you bought the property to the east, amalgamated the two, and then did an entire development to create a real address.
I think ideally that's how it would happen. But as I said, the property, the application has been circulated, so the public works comments will come in, and that's the opportunity. We have to kind of go back and forth and see what the give is on that ultimate road.
I guess the committee recommends that the road widening should be used for the development. That would be a recommendation.
That's my point, second bill.
I definitely have some good stuff to start working the zoning with.
Great. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Maybe we should just finalize a couple of comments on both of those. Make sure that his notes are minutes. Oh yeah, we're gonna have a bit of an administrative meeting in there. Discuss motion minutes.
Anyone want an iPad? We do it.